Good morning, everybody. We are delighted to have you. Let me welcome you to the Person-Centered Planning, Building Your Circle Support. This is a series of 4 sessions that we're hearing from David Wetherow as our special presenter. David, as most of you know, is from British Columbia and is one of the founders and writers and implementers of Person-Centered Planning and Circle Support for many decades. And so we're delighted to have him with us. So last week's homework, if anybody would just put into the chat box of how you can have a conversation with other people, that just help us get started and on our way. Just a few housekeeping things, which most of you know by now. Most people use Zoom, but just in case we have anybody, the view button up in the upper right-hand corner, just you can toggle through, and particularly in the PowerPoint, some people find seeing one or the other is helpful. The using subtitles, closed caption. And this is really partly that anybody has trouble with hearing, but it also can be helpful. So as your service coordinators are having meetings to model behavior, oftentimes if you enable that, it won't work unless you enable that, then many people have trouble with literacy, can have greater comprehension. It helps people. We have a translation today, Spanish translation for about 7 or 8 people. And this you have to enable down at the bottom of your screen, either at the bottom of your screen on the menu bar or where it says more, will say interpretation, and you just have to click on that to start that. That's a toggle button. You can see how that's working. And we have Sam DuBois, who's from South America, Ecuador, with us today. By the wonders of Zoom, doing the interpretation translation. We appreciate his help. We're asking everybody to be on screen the whole time so that we can see you and meet you and know you a little bit better. It helps us to do a better job. As you know, the training is sponsored by the Nebraska Council of Developmental Disabilities. We've had several of the staff, and Kristen, their executive director, with us in other sessions, and also the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. At the end of this, we'll ask you to do a survey and drop that in the Dropbox, and it helps us very much because our funders, which I just showed you, very much, and also the federal government, this is behind all this, the federal funds, want to be able to see where the money's being spent and how it's benefiting people. Our training team today is David Wetherow, and all these people are a backup. It takes a village. Jennifer James is with us and is one of our co-trainers in some of the other sessions. As is Dr. Mary Beckwith, and then Formel and Mary Angus are with us doing the chat box and helping with the breakout groups. So we'll be all working together today. With that, I'm going to quickly move on and give you David Wetherow. David, thank you for being with us and sharing your incredible knowledge. I think of David as Master Circle Support and my guru for helping with all this. David, you're on.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. And thanks everybody for supporting this and for being here. It's really good to see all of you in the room. We've got 25 participants today, and that's terrific. So welcome back to the Nebraska Star Raft, where we've been introducing a method for building great support circles. Over the past few weeks, we talked about gathering your circle, setting a good direction, and taking the helm. And today we're going to be talking about staying the course, tools for sustaining the work over time. Because one of the things that we know from our life experience is that relationships tend to thin out over time. Circles often thin out over time. Microboards thin out over time. We need to be on purpose about doing things that keep the work sustained and active and enjoyable. And for the 4th time, I'll mention that years ago when we were doing some work with the Nisga'a people in the Nass Valley, they taught us to start any important event by honoring our teachers. Now, in some ways, the Nisga'a people are the perfect example of folks who have worked out this pattern for sustaining the work over time. They have a system of support circles around every single person in the community. And so every person has a support circle, and every person is on at least 1 or 2 other people's support circle. That's been operating for 6,000 years. And it's interesting to think about, how do you keep something like that going for 6,000 years? It's part of their ritual conversations. It's part of their traditions. It's part of the way they they celebrate birth and death and illness and health and all kinds of other things. It becomes part of the culture. Marcia Forrest, Jack Pierpoint, and John O'Brien have been leaning on this topic for a while, but they've also created a couple of tools, one of which we'll introduce today that's specifically helpful in getting a circle unstuck. By the way, I want everyone to visit and use all the materials that you can find in inclusion.com, which is their website. It's a wonderful collection of books and articles and a free video library, a free theater of great videos that you can tap into at any time. And everything that they are doing is consistent with what we've been doing because they've been our great teachers over time. John McGee, who is the person who came up with the idea and the practice of gentle teaching, and we'll introduce John a little later on when we talk about getting through turbulent times. And Joe Schaefer, a musician and cultural anthropologist who created a way after spending time with First Nations people all over the world to find peace and understanding and empathy, and created something called the Stone Game, which we'll show you in some detail. So this is a slight change in the sequence of things. Usually the first breakout room happens about a third of the way through or halfway through. We're going to do it right now. At the end of last week's webinar, all of us were asked to notice the times over the course of the following week. Now, this is last week. So think about the times over the course of last week, between last week's session and today's session, when one or another of the action steps that we talked about popped into our minds as something that we could do in the moment as we were doing our work or in the course of our daily lives. I had that experience just this week when somebody mentioned something that they were attached to, and Joan Loomis's idea of open the door and see all the people and where do those people have standing came in. And I was able to suggest, think about that. So there one or another of these action steps, and we've probably talked about 60 or 70 of them, will pop into our minds as something we can do in the moment. So for the next 12 minutes, we're going to send everybody, including me, into a breakout room and talk about the specific action step that occurred to you, when something popped into your mind about, I could do that, or I'm going to do that at the moment. And what led you to have that thought? What incident or words or opportunity sort of made that thought pop up, and what action you took in the moment, or what action you didn't take in the moment. And Mary's going to send us into breakout rooms of probably 6-7 people. So we'll each have about 2 minutes to talk about that. And in the tradition of circles and breakout rooms, just go from one person to another, make sure that everybody has an invitation to talk and a little bit of time to talk. And we'll see you back in 12 minutes. That was a really interesting session and a really interesting moment. I was the last person to speak, and something that somebody else said made something pop into my mind about something that I really need to get on with, I really need to do. And that's just a perfect example of realizing in the moment that we need to strengthen this relationship. Back in the day, there was a movie called Field of Dreams, and the sort of little logo on all the posters and things like that was, if you build it, they will come. And if you start to build the circle, if you start to invite people, they will come. People are going to be glad to be asked. But we also know that if you feed them, they will stay. Feeding people in the broadest sense, not just coffee and whatever it is in the middle of this beautiful piece of toast and grapes and things like that, but feeding their spirits, feeding their stories, helping them stay enthusiastic and connected and needed is really important. And there's a bunch of ways of paying attention to that. There's a bunch of ways of doing that. One thing that's really helpful is paying attention to hospitality in all of its forms. We'll get into a little bit more detail about that in a minute. And the expectations and our understanding of why we're here and how important it is and what we can all do, and the setting. And we're trying to establish settings that are comfortable and that have this sense of a circle, that have this sense of equality, that have this sense of beauty. And I realized as I think about all the admission and discharge meetings and other kinds of meetings that I've been in, that this place puts people's heads and hearts into a totally different location than this space. When we're doing person-centered planning, when we're having circle meetings, when we're helping somebody either come home from hospital or come home from an institution or come back to the community from isolation, this is the kind of space that we want to create. Now, these days of Zoom, it's a little bit tricky. And Mark Friedman has taught me over the last couple of years that it's really important to do things on Zoom, kind of compensate for the fact that we haven't been able to be in the same room with each other for a long time. So what are some of the other ways of creating beauty, of sharing space, of taking turns? Judith Snow suggests that one of the things that we can do every time we get together is share something about the dream or the gift. And that gets us into a different mindset than sharing something about all the problems or all the aggravations. And there are problems and aggravations that we need to take into account. But if we start with the dream or the gift, it sets us in a different direction. And there's a wonderful body of understanding called appreciative inquiry that says that the questions that we ask are going to create the atmosphere, are going to create a difference in what's actually possible to happen when we gather. She said, ask where the places are where the dream or the gift might take root. And one of the things that does is it gets everybody thinking about where are the places where I have standing, where I could invite the person or introduce the person. So if we're talking about the places, everybody has, standing and influence and presence and welcome somewhere in the community. But the other thing is that sometimes nobody in the room has one of these places, but we know somebody who might be able to help. We know somebody who has standing in Toastmasters, or who has standing in a habitat build, or who has standing in the person's church community, whatever that is. Are there any additional resources that might help? And I think in some ways that's a way of getting unstuck from thinking about, well, we don't have this, we don't have that, we don't have transportation. And that brings us back to the question about who might be able to help with that in advance of getting a new county transportation system. We can probably figure that out together as a circle. And then what are our next steps so that everybody has a chance to, again, contribute and lean in and think about what my personal next step might be in helping to get something either unwound or on the road. And that makes everybody in the room feel valued. It makes everybody in the room feel like their ideas, their connections, their relationships are really important, really valued. Michael Small says that from time to time, it's helpful to reflect on what he calls a pattern of 4+1 questions. What have we tried? What have we learned? What did we like about what we tried? What didn't we like about what we tried? And given what we've learned, what will we try next? I'm in a personal support that has been sort of like a little roller coaster ride. There's times of highs, and there's times when you've gone down the slide and hit a sharp corner, and something that we tried just didn't work or wasn't working. But what that leads us to, if we are brave enough to have this conversation, is what do we do next? This is important. This is what we tried. Here's what we're learning about that approach. What do we do next? And again, bringing the circle members into that conversation, because if I'm stuck on it, it's very possible that somebody else in that circle isn't stuck in the same way that I am. So even the tough conversations can really be fruitful, and again, can nurture the circle. It's important to share the work. Dennis, if I can share a little bit about your story. One of the things that you mentioned is that you're your son's guardian, and you were filling out forms, and realized as you were filling out this form for the umpteenth time that sooner or later somebody else is going to need to be the guardian. Somebody's going to need to have the spirit and the practice and the responsibility and the gift of taking that important role. So it's really important in a circle to share the work around. Moms and dads in particular are doing all 8 or 9 of these things. And to the extent that we can share the work, first of all, it takes some weight off of our shoulders. But the other thing it does is it gives everybody in the circle something important to do, something that they feel good about contributing. And you're not just sitting there, sort of like a bump on a log, as people say, wondering why I'm even in this meeting. If you can share some of these concrete tasks that we talked about in some detail last week, it's a way of keeping people engaged over time. And don't forget to celebrate. My daughter says, start with a done list every time you get together and meet, because if we start with the undone list and start with heaping hot coals on people's heads, we don't want to be in the room for much longer. So start with a done list. And again, begin with the person at the center, but go around the circle and give everybody a chance to say, I've thought about this and I didn't do it, but I'm going to do it this coming week because I know it's important, like me contacting my brother. Somebody else will say, I realized that I need to recruit somebody, but somebody else might say, we got this piece finished. We actually made some progress on safety, or we made some progress on a connection issue or a health issue that we're dealing with. As we've thought about this over time, we've sort of made a collection of things that we sort of titled repeat energy creating elements. Repeat things that keep us that keep everybody energized. And as you see, the list has actually gotten bigger since the last time I shot that picture. This is a live picture of what those elements are. Realize and talk about the fact and celebrate the fact that as soon as the first person joins, there's one more person in my life who can accept and understand me, be part of the life that I dreamed about, be watchful about safety and security, build pathways to social roles, can open new doors, can help organize the work, invite new people, brings in a new set of skills, ideas, and connections. One more source of creativity, standing, and influence, and trust. And if we keep that in mind, we're realizing that our next move in terms of making one more invitation can be hugely important to not only the person at the circle, but the circle itself. Celebrate the done list, as Alia says. Mark Friedman has developed a set of ideas about getting beyond tokenism that apply to everybody we need accessible meeting space. And that sometimes that means making sure that people have accessibility in terms of Zoom. Some people, not just the person at the center, but some people in the meeting need adaptive materials, large print or graphics or video. Sometimes we need to arrange transportation, invitations to take time to speak and to speak, plain language, practice with the person and practice with other circle members. Value people's unique perspectives and voices and so on. So these are things that we can do between meetings and in the meetings so that, again, people really feel supported for being there. Sorry, I just need to offer hospitality. And hospitality, again, means more than breaking bread. Sorry about that. It's nourishing the circle, and it's letting people know what's going to be happening, and it's welcoming and helping everyone feel welcomed, and communication supports and so on. Just have to keep moving this around so that I can see it. Recognize and celebrate everyone's contribution. Spend some time learning in each meeting, a little bit of time learning something. There's some wonderful 10-minute videos of things like Dave Petoniak thinking about or connection. There's some materials that we can just look out and share and hand out and spend maybe 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes in each meeting, learning something new, but another 10 or 15 minutes reflecting on how we're doing as a circle. And one of the things that we have sent you as a handout today are the details in what John O'Brien and Jeff Strully created called key circle questions. So what have we agreed to invest in for the person's long-term future? How have we strengthened our relationship with the person at the center of the circle? I think there's about 20 of these, and you could almost put them in a hat and just pull one out in any circle meeting and just spend 6, 7, 8 minutes going around and giving everybody a chance to say something about how we've strengthened our relationship with the person at the center, or what we still might need to do that, and what our first steps are in doing that. So spending a little bit of time in each meeting, learning something new and reflecting on how we're doing as a circle are productive and energy creating moments. Take turns being at the center on occasion. We talked about that last week. So there's a whole set of things, and you have this list, and it's something that we can keep thinking about so that we don't just spend our time recycling the set of difficulties and problems and challenges and sadness that sometimes overwhelms us. I think that's good enough for that. Hold on for a second. I just need to share the screen again. So right now, I think we're about halfway through. It's 40 minutes to the top of the hour, which is a really good time to take a coffee break, stand up, stretch, grab a coffee or a tea or a Coke or whatever it is that hydrates you and gives you a little bit of energy. And we'll see you back in about 10 minutes. And just do some thinking while you're taking your coffee break about ways that you can strengthen and help sustain the work that you're inviting people to be doing on your behalf, on behalf of somebody that you support, on behalf of a son or a daughter or a brother. And we'll see you back in 10 minutes at the top of the hour. So Welcome back, everybody. I can't count this morning, so I said the top of the hour. It was actually 10 minutes to the top of the hour. I was trying to figure out as I was getting my coffee why I was feeling so nervous over the last 10 minutes of this presentation. And I realized that it was because I hadn't framed what I was saying and just sort of threw out 36 things. The frame is this. There's always a bunch of things that we can do to keep people feeling engaged and valued and welcome. And they're ordinary human things. None of them are specialized techniques and things like that. It's everything that our moms and our kindergarten teachers taught us about hospitality and about recognizing and honoring the presence of every single person in the room. So that list of maybe 30 things kind of breaks down to that. There are times when in any relationship, whether it's a marriage or a circle or a brother and sister relationship, where there are difficulties. And in sailing terms, one of the difficulties are times when we're not making any headway, and we would love to be making some headway, but we are either stuck or actually getting blown backwards. And in the sailing world, that's called finding yourself in irons. If you look at this picture, one of the things that you see is that there are, I think, 9 points of sail where you can either go with the wind or toward the wind or sideways from the wind, but you're always getting power from the wind, and the sail is getting powered. If you've been heading straight into the wind for too long, you find yourself what's called in irons, which is that the wind is coming across the sail equally on both sides. The sail is just flopping around, and you're not only not making any progress, but you're getting pushed backwards, even though you don't necessarily know that you're getting pushed backwards. What does that mean in circle terms or in relationship terms? It means that sometimes we've been trying to head too directly in the direction that we've been wanting to head in for too long. And what we need to do is ease off for a while. So the sailing trick for getting out of irons is actually to let the wind take advantage of us for a while. You pull the sail to one side, and the wind is pushing you backwards for a little while, which actually feels like not only no progress, but regress. But what ends up happening is that the sail finally fills with wind, and you can make forward motion again. I think every one of us has found ourselves either in a relationship or a work situation where we're stuck in that way. The other way that we get stuck are the times when there's no wind at all, and it's called the doldrums. And the reality is that you can't make progress when there's not either the wind of difficulty or the wind of optimism, the wind of hopefulness. And sometimes people or circles or classrooms or job sites get stuck in the doldrums. And there's a simple formula for how to survive in the doldrums, which is to, as Alia says, as my daughter says, have some meetings that are just fun. Just celebrate, Christmas or Hanukkah or Thanksgiving. Do a virtual Easter egg hunt. Have some meetings that are just about hospitality rather than trying to keep pushing forward with something that we don't seem to have the energy to do. And sooner or later, the wind will power us back up. Sooner or later, what we are hoping for what this little gust of movement will do is get us repowered. But recognize the fact that sooner or later, a circle is likely to get stuck because the energy level has gone down. And what we need to do is find happy ways of waiting it out. There's another sort of standing challenge that circles get into, which is recycling problems. You know, we recycle everything these days, tin cans and plastic containers and things like that. We often also recycle problems and keep just sort of aggravating over the same issue. It really helps when you see that happening, when you notice that that is happening, to bring some other people into the room, even for a little while, to kind of break the chain of how we're all kind of stuck in the same way. And Jack and Marcia and John created something called a solution circle, or they've renamed it now a solution seeking circle. That's a 30-minute exercise that really helps people get unstuck. So there are 4 roles in the exercise and 4 6-minute segments in the exercise. So one of the things that you can promise to people is that this is going to happen and it's going to get done in 30 minutes. We're not going to dwell in this space of difficulty for the next 2.5 hours or for the next 5 weeks. It's a 30-minute exercise. When Faye and I were doing a lot of person-centered planning training, path training, we always introduced this exercise as a way of helping groups get unstuck or helping people get unstuck. And the way we introduced it was to give everybody in the room a chance to participate in a solution-seeking circle. So we'd create groups of 7 and one person in the circle is brave enough to say, okay, I've got a problem that I've been stuck on and struggling with for a long time. I'd really appreciate your help in getting unwound from this and making some headway. So we're calling that person the solution seeker. It's really valuable and important to have a graphic recorder as part of this conversation, somebody who can just capture in words and hopefully maybe a few images what they're hearing. So there's a visual way that people can keep track of what's being thought about, what's being said, what's being invented or discovered. It's really critical to have a timekeeper to keep our 30-minute promise, but also to keep people reminded of what stage of this we're in. And that timekeeper, needs to have a watch or a smartphone or some way of keeping track of 6-minute segments. And then that circle of friends and allies. And remember, when we're doing this, diversity works in terms of age or culture or experience or viewpoints, and sometimes language, maybe a different ethnic background, because what we want are different ways of thinking about this. And people have used this in the workshops that we've been doing to do everything from figure out how to get better meals on the table for their kids because they're a single mom and they're working and everybody gets home at 4:30 in the afternoon. And it's tempting to just break out pizza, frozen pizza, to getting a parent out of a nursing home, to, in one case that was really interesting, finding a spouse. There was one woman in a workshop that we were doing in one of the states who had been disappointed for the nth time in a relationship. And she knew that she needed to be doing something different. So she recruited 6 other people to help her think about that. So that's that group of friends and allies. So the 5 minutes are now 6 minutes. So for the first 5 minutes, the solution seeker talks about the problem or the question or the dilemma or the challenge that they are facing. And everybody else in the group just listens. So only one person is talking. And they may run out of steam somewhere in the middle of the first 6 minutes, and everybody else in the room just keeps listening. You don't start pitching in, asking for clarification, suggesting good ideas and things like that. You just keep listening. My wife has spent many years in the role of being a public health nurse, and she would go and do the well baby check and weights and measures and writing things down. And she said very often, just as she had her hand on the doorknob to finish the meeting and go on to the next place, all the real stuff would start to come out. So somewhere in that 6 minutes, even if the person gets quiet for a while, there's going to be that opportunity for them to think about one more thing, one more way of expressing or looking at or defining the challenge that they're facing. So just listen. The graphic recorder might ask the person to sort of capsulize the vision in 1 or 2 sentences toward the end. They're saying, that was 5 minutes, we got 1 minute left. Can you say something that sort of encapsulates this question? And that may or may not happen, but they have an opportunity to do that. Timekeeper calls time. And for the next 6 minutes, the circle of people offer as many ideas and possibilities and suggestions and experiences and possibilities as they can in 6 minutes. And the solution seeker just listens. So one advantage of that type of pattern is that you don't get early into yes, but, and that kind of thing, which stops the flow of ideas. This is classic brainstorming. And every idea just goes up on the wall. The graphic recorder is recording. The solution seeker is just listening. The timekeeper calls time and reminds people that for the next 6 minutes, it's okay to dialogue. What we need to do is dialogue back and forth between the solution seeker and the people in the circle. And again, if the circle only includes people who've been embedded in the problem, that's going to be limited. This is all going to be limited. So you need to bring new people into this interesting setting. Judith Snow used to claim, and I think she actually did, that she would go out and in hotel lobbies and drag people into the room just so they could sort of fill out a solution-seeking circle. And dialogue can take any form that it needs to take, clarification or what did you really mean by this, or, whatever shape that needs to take. Timekeeper calls time. And for the last 6 minutes, the solution seeker has the floor again. Everybody else in the room just listens. And the solution seeker declares his or her first steps in moving towards a solution. And again, there's going to be moments of silence in that, but the person really needs to have the time and the little bit of fire under them to be looking at the graphic, looking at the words, thinking about what they just heard, thinking about the dialogue and saying, okay, out of all that, here's what I'm going to do next. Here's my first step. And one of the things that we talked about in the second session on Set a Good Direction is every once in a while, it's good to drop in a tiny facilitation question about, that's great, what's the first step in doing that? And remember, we talked about the person who said, I need to achieve inner peace. And the graphic recorder turned around and said, that's great. What's your first step in doing that? What's your first concrete action step? So the graphic recorder is actually in an interesting position of being able to ask that kind of fruitful question. So that's 4 6s or 24. And then you can spend the next 6 minutes sort of going around the circle and giving people a chance to talk about how they experienced this, what this was like for them. And the solution seeker gets to say something about that. The graphic recorder gets to say something about that, including the fact that they might have been nervous. They weren't sure that they were ready to do this. The timekeeper talks about what it was like to be the timekeeper. And the people in the circle get a chance to say what this was like for them. And inevitably, people will say, I'm really glad I was here. I'm really glad I had a chance to hear this. And I can help. And by the way, here's how I'm going to help, to make an offer of their first step. People find this a good way of getting unstuck, getting out of irons, even making the time in the doldrums tolerable. And it's something, again, ordinary human stuff that we can do. Solution seeker speaks, everybody else just listens. The circle speaks, the solution speaker just listens. 5 minutes of dialogue. And then for 5 minutes, the solution seeker looks at all that and says, here are my first steps. And then we reflect, as Michael Small suggests, on what have we just done? What have we just learned? What did we like about what we just did? What did we not like about what we just did? What are we doing next? Then it comes time to look at times of difficulty, times of confusion, times of conflict, times of when people are frustrated with themselves or with each other. We call that navigating in turbulent times. This is my favorite Jules Verne woodcut from, I think it was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where the giant squid threatens to turn over the boat and drown everybody, and people are, caught in the tentacles or chopping away and things like that. Everybody experiences these kinds of times, at work or in our relationships and in circles. I used to worry out loud to Judith about stuff, and she would always say, David, gather your circle. Where's your circle? And one time she was worried about something. She was having difficulty in her living arrangement with the other people who were in the same co-op that she was in. And I said, Judith, gather your circle. It's time to gather your circle. And she said, my circle's mad at me. And they were, and probably for good reason, but she knew that that was the work that she needed to do. There's a couple of useful tools that we have learned to do that. And again, all of these are ordinary human enterprises. They're not special skills or special techniques. In gentle teaching, or as the people in Michigan are now terming it, creating a culture of gentleness. Our teacher, John McGee, reminded us to always work in ways that keep not only the person at the center, but keep everyone feeling safe and loved and loving and engaged. And he said there are 4 simple tools, 4 simple ways that each of us has of doing that, of helping somebody or helping the circle experience those things and knowing that those things are true. One has to do with how we are looking at people. He says we have our gaze, make the look in our eyes soft and loving and warm and slow and welcoming and nurturing. And remember, it was last week, I think, that we talked about the Chinese character for listening: eyes, ears, heart, undivided attention, and giving sort of reference or deference to the person who we're thinking about. Our hands, instead of pushing and pulling and striking or defending, our hands can be tender and warm and uplifting and safe and peaceful and slow in approaching. So the person realizes that we're not going to physically hurt them, but we're also not going to drag them into something that they're not ready to do. I remember doing a program evaluation in a school one time where somebody was being led to a recreation program by a handhold that involves grabbing the person's hands and creating a lot of pain in their hand, so that they had to follow you. Otherwise, they were going to experience a lot more pain. That creates a lot of distortion in the relationship. It creates a lot of fear. And the person ends up expressing that fear in a whole bunch of ways that we call challenging behaviors. The position that we stand in of being accepting and strong and creating safety. So, and our words, tender and uplifting. And John had originally talked about this in terms of how we support someone who has extremely challenging, harming to self, harming to others behaviors. And what we learned over time is that all of us need this. All of us need to feel safe and loved and loving and engaged. And it's just really simple human tools that allow us to do that. One more. When creating the Stone Game, our friend, musician, cultural anthropologist, Dr. Joe Schaefer, found a way to help people do what he calls crossing a bridge together into a new world. We usually think about, when we're in conflict, meeting together in the middle of the bridge. Joe says, we're all on the same side of the bridge. What we need to do is cross a bridge together into a different state with each other, into a different understanding, into a different kind of empathy. And Joe learned the elements of this process from the work that he was doing and the visiting that he was doing with First Nations communities in the United States and in Canada and in New Zealand and other places. And he kept seeing the same pattern occurring and occurring and occurring again. So he started to teach this and would be invited to come to places that were in trouble, in serious trouble, and do this workshop for 3 days with the people who were in trouble with each other. And by the end of the workshop, they would have found themselves in a completely different relationship with each other. So I'll tell you the story about how we experienced this. We'd gotten invited to a 3-day workshop that he was doing in a community in British Columbia, where people had been not only in conflict, but up in arms against each other for quite some time. And this was a circumstance where people from the First Nations community, the Native Canadian community or Aboriginal community, they prefer to be called First Nations, and the surrounding and absorbing white community had been in conflict not only for decades, but probably for over 100 years. And there's this terrible history of people having been pushed out of the places where they lived into reserves, reservations, where the kids had been hauled off to residential schools, where the Indian was being taught out of them or beaten out of them. You know, just really difficult experiences. And people came back from these experiences with a lot of anger, a lot of fury. So there was trouble in this town. And they invited Joe, somebody invited Joe to come and help. And Joe taught them the Stone Game. And by the way, we found ourselves walking across the campus from our little cabin to the big room where Joe was going to do this. And we introduced ourselves, and Joe's looking at a sheet of who's going to be there. And he stops at the name of one person and he says, "Oh no, she's going to be here. I can't be in this room." He turned to us and he said, "David and Faye, you guys are going to have to do this workshop." And we said, "Joe, we don't even know what this workshop is, how to do it. But we will have your back and you will probably do all right." So he went in and did this. It was somebody that he'd been having difficulty with for quite some time. So I'm going to show you what Joe showed us. Okay, now you should be seeing a red panel and a group of stones. First day, Joe welcomes everybody into the room. It's a big room. There are 30 people from the First Nations community, people from the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who've been in the middle of this conflict, people from the business community, farmers, ranchers, people from schools and things like that, all of whom have been in difficulty with each other for a very long time. Joe says, what we're going to learn is a pattern for taking turns and listening to each other and coming to a different kind of understanding of how we can speak and listen to each other in a way that generates understanding and empathy. I don't know if he framed it that way, but that's where he was headed. And he teaches people to do what he calls the silent stone game for the better part of a day. And imagine there are 6 people or 7 or 8 people sitting around in a circle, and everybody has a little pile of stones. Joe brought these beautiful polished agates. These are stones that you can find in any Walmart or Michael's store for putting plants in. And the pattern looks like this. So it's one person picks up a stone, it doesn't matter who starts, and puts the stone somewhere in the middle of the circle. And it goes around to the left. The next person picks up a stone and puts their stone somewhere in the middle of the circle. The third person, the fourth person. And by the way, the fifth person might decide that they see a pattern starting to occur. And before they place their stone, they want to move somebody else's stone to a better position. And Joe introduces the rule that you can't move anybody else's stone. You can put your stone close to theirs or far away from theirs or even on top of theirs. These don't balance very well, but you can't move anybody else's stone. And the lesson that's in that is that once somebody has made their statement, their meaning, their intention is still there and still needs to stay there. And we end up seeing where that stands in a kind of larger pattern that's emerging. So people keep taking turns. And at some point, this person might decide, I think I'm going to pass. But the way you pass is you set a stone aside as a marker. And it keeps going around. And again, there's no talking. One of the things that's interesting about the unspoken stone game is that someone who doesn't speak is as present and effective a player as anybody else. This person might pass a second time, and it goes around, and people are thinking inside themselves, whatever they're thinking, but they're sort of following the rules and not moving each other's stones. And when this person decides that they're going to still pass, the rule is that on the third turn, you need to play all three of these stones. And the lesson that's inside that is sooner or later, we need to hear from you. And sooner or later, you need to say what's going on in your mind, in your heart. Because one of the most dangerous things that we experience in our relationships with our siblings, our spouses, our friends, our circles, is things going underground for way too long, that things that really need to be spoken remain unspoken. And this is really simple. I mean, we're talking about, a pattern, a round that doesn't involve words at all, but just simply involves, putting stones down. And people get kind of interested in the patterns that are evolving. And once all the stones are played, or all but one, and he asks people to sort of keep one back, and I'll just do it like this. Usually the patterns really end up, kind of turn out to be quite beautiful. Joe says, whoever's turn is next, put a stone in and say something about what you were experiencing as you did this. And Jack might say, I couldn't figure out who won because it's called a game and usually people win in games. I couldn't figure out who won. And of course, the lesson in that is that it's not about winning. It's about keeping the game going long enough for us to experience something different. Somebody might say, I was sure when Mary put her stone down far away from mine that she was mad at me, that she thought, that I had put mine in the wrong place. And I got kind of teed off about that. And Mary has to wait to respond to that. Somebody else says, I was really interested in the patterns and tried to make the pattern come out my way. And then what I realized was that a different pattern was showing up, and it was equally interesting. And I started adding to that pattern. And Mary finally says, that wasn't what I was meaning at all. When I put my stone down, here's what I was thinking. Joe uses that time as an opportunity to say, one of the things that we consistently do is a form of mind reading, where we can say, with some certainty, I know what you meant by that. I understand. He says, that's not always accurate. He says, there's a possibility that that's not always accurate, but it's always accurate to say the meaning that I'm making with the way you put that stone down, or with the look on your face, or with the way your arms are crossed, or with the tone of your voice. You had a tone. The meaning that I'm making is this. And that gives the person a chance for, maybe 4 turns later to say, that's not what I was meaning. I had a bad shrimp for lunch. And one real concrete example of that was a path that we did with a family where, the daughter was in the middle. The parents had been separated for quite some time. The dad was kind of checked out of the action for a long period of time. And he spent the entire path, starting with the vision and the goal and the where we are now, and with the bold steps and who do we need to enroll, saying nothing. He kept passing and passing and passing until it came down to first steps. And he had his arms crossed. He had this really kind of cranky look on his face. And he said, I have been feeling such sorrow about having gotten disconnected from you, and in a state where I made it impossible for us to connect. And he says, I really want to change that. And my first step is I'm inviting all of us right in this moment to have the next session, our next meeting, because we got work to do, in my house. I'd be really happy to welcome people into my house. And that was a perfect example of, we need to hear from you, but also the meaning that we were making, that probably his wife and daughter, and certainly I was making, with the look on his face, with the fact that he wasn't talking, was that he thought this was all nonsense, right? He thought this was all, airy-fairy stuff, and had, or that I was doing something wrong. That's the other thing that we very often figure, is that it's directed toward me, that I wasn't doing a very good job, et cetera. So Joe says it's really important to understand that distinction. Joe will have people play, especially if they've been in trouble for a long time with each other, the silent stone game for a long time, so that they kind kind of get grounded in a different way of listening and experiencing each other. Somebody just popped into the chat. I love this game. So Joe will have people who've been in difficulty play the Silent Stone game for a long time. It wasn't in this one, but Joe told the story of a kid who came to one of these events with great big river rocks that were about the size of large grapefruits. And a river rock that size probably weighs 10 pounds. And first thing he did was, when it came his turn to do something in the Silent Stone game, he dropped a river rock into the middle of the thing, and the floor kind of shook, and all the other stones sort of shook. And Joe said, I get it. And that's your statement. That's what you mean to be saying. That's what you mean to be signaling. But what I want you to do next time around is to place your river rock down. He said, we're not here to throw stones at each other. We're here to place and watch and listen and pay attention to what we're experiencing and what we're thinking. And when it comes your turn, you can take your this big river rock, which is as important as anybody else's, but just place it down. And he did that. And over the course of several Silent Stone games, his visage changed, his way of feeling about this whole thing changed, just because of that tiny bit of coaching. Once people have done this to the degree that Joe feels is enough, whatever that is, Joe has people use this pattern, the same pattern, in the form of a speaking stone game. And he will pick on something, he'll pick a topic that isn't not the topic that brought everybody into the room in the first place. That's not the history or the difficulty or the fury or the anger, or the grief that brought everybody into the room. Something separate, but something that still has the potential for dissonance, for a bit, for different ideas, for different positions. These days it might be interesting to do this around the topic of open carry gun laws. Have the same pattern, but this time it's time to talk. So somebody, and it doesn't matter who, puts a stone in the middle, and he says, or she says, this is what I'm thinking about this. Here's what I'm experiencing. Here's what I'm afraid of. Here's, and maybe I'm afraid that there won't be open carry gun laws, or maybe I'm afraid that, there's going to be too many guns in the classroom, or whatever that is. One after another, people put down their ideas, and Joe starts to call this the field of meaning. And the other thing that Joe does is he teaches something early in this round, which is that when you're putting your stone down, to say, I'm Dave. Here's what I'm thinking about this. I'm Mary. Here's what I'm thinking about this. I'm Charlie. I'm Anne, and I pass. And he says the reason for doing that, the reason for saying that, is usually we're so accustomed to thinking that what I'm about to say is the truth. And I'm Andrew. This is my truth. I'm Agnes. This is my truth, which is, again, one of the reasons why we don't move other people's stones around, because this is her truth, but it's not necessarily the truth. So it starts to give people an opportunity to let go, again, of the need to define the pattern for everybody else. And once you say, something here, and somebody else responds to it, you have to wait 5, 6, 7 more times before you react or respond or reply to what this person said. And very often people will say at the end of the spoken stone game, as they're putting in their last rock, you know, I was ready to, you know, to drop a big rock on the top of your head. But I saw after, as all the other people were speaking, how what you were saying fits in. And again, whatever people are experiencing as they're doing this, they have an opportunity to speak to this, to speak about this. And Joe will have people play the spoken stone game around other topics 4 or 5 times. It's about turn taking. It's about passing, but sooner or later, we need to hear from you. It's about not reacting in the moment. It's about taking responsibility for saying, this is my truth. It's not the truth. You don't have to say that, but just say, I'm Dave. And it gentles people all the way down. And Joe will have people do this for a while. And then he brought 30 people into the circle. The RCMP person and Mary, who had been grievously harmed, sexually abused, physically abused, emotionally abused, but who was also very abusive because she's fighting through and fighting back against that history. She was the woman that Joe was so worried about. 30 people sat around in the circle and started talking about the issue, history, the experience, the topic, the difficulty of what that brought them into the room in the first place. And maybe the first person to speak was the woman who was an RCMP constable. And she said, I'm Andrea. This is what I've been experiencing. And Jack from the school said, I'm Jack. I share some of that experience, but I've had a somewhat different experience because of, whatever, I'm Charlie. I'm Mary. And Mary's full of animosity still, and that's fine. She says, I'm still furious about this. And it went around, imagine 30 people doing this over the course of a day, because it wasn't just 8, it was 30 people in the room. And it went around over the course of a day. The actual physical pattern becomes less important than what we are hearing from each other, what we are learning from each other, what we're learning about ourselves. We're taking turns. The kid with the great 8-pound rocks is, placing his down, that he's got something important to say. Sooner or later, we need to hear from you. Mary started setting stones aside. And this pattern, this field of meaning, this field of experience, this field of history starts to be seen in relationship to everybody's experience and our changing experience as we're doing this. So this went on for quite some time. I'll just move bunches of stones in here. And finally, Mary said, she'd been setting stones aside and breaking the rule, by the way. She put 1 aside and 2 aside, and then the 3rd one aside, and came around. She put the 4th one aside, and nobody corrected her. She put the 5th one aside and the 6th one. And she finally said, I'm Mary. And she says, this is my anger. And I don't know what any of you are going to do with this, but I'm putting it aside. I'm putting it in here. I'm done with it. And people responded. And Mary passed away about 6 months after this event. And I can pretty much guarantee you that everybody who was in this stone game came to her funeral. She had a life-changing experience. And so did everybody else in the room, because people were terrified of her, or people were angry at her, people were resentful of her. But she was finally able to hear and see everybody's experience, including their sorrow, including their repentance, including their understanding of the harm that had been done, and put that anger in here. Joe has done this in contexts where people have been at odds for decades around very, very important issues. And we're suggesting that maybe we need to learn this again. Now, you don't have to spend 3 days doing this, but it's valuable in a marriage, in a circle, in a conflicted family relationship, in a time or a place where there's a history of difficulty, to be able to pull out a pattern that gives people a different way of processing this, a different way of speaking, a different way of hearing each other, a different way of waiting it out and seeing that somebody's move, somebody's statement, somebody's contradiction is part of a different pattern, of a reasonable pattern. And Joe's been practicing this for a very long time. I remember being in a stone game with Judith Snow. Judith brought us in to kind of straighten out some people that she'd been having difficulty with. And somebody else in the circle said, "We don't need your stinking stones." It's sort of like, we don't need your stinking badges from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But they did need they did need something like this, and without stones, because the person was so offended that we had brought stones and so fearful that we had brought stones, that we did, we still had the conversation. And as the people who had a little bit of standing to facilitate or lead or conduct the conversation, we made sure that people were taking turns. It was easy to say, "All right, Judith, it's your turn. Al, it's your turn." There should have been more people in the room. That's the other thing that event taught me, reminded me. And it's coming back to the solution circle question about if the only people in the room are the people who've been having trouble with each other and generating this difficulty. They need to be here, but it's also helpful to have some other folks here. And now you know this pattern. So hold on for a second. I'm just going to stop the video. And I'm going to choose my virtual background. And I'm going to change cameras and mark your recording and movie making person is going to have to take that out. All of these are ways of keeping a circle together over the long haul, keeping a family together over the long haul, keeping our love and commitment and effort together over the long haul. So we can operate with some confidence that this is going to last, because we have ways of making it last. We have ways of helping it to last, not forcing it to last, but helping it to last. I think about the 101 Dalmatians line where Cruella, or whatever her name is, Smee says, "How do you get them to love you?" And she says, "You force them to love you." Well, that may not work, but there are some other things that can work. we've talked about gathering the circle, and that it's not only important and valuable and life-giving, but it's also possible to do that. That people will be glad to finally be asked, as Jane said, thanks for giving me back my Uncle Joe. Now I know what to do. It's possible to set a good direction that includes the things that are important to the person and the things that we know are important for the person. Which, if you think about your own development in terms of how you manage your safety, how you learn to cross the street safely, how you learn to negotiate and navigate your own relationships. But there were times when you had somebody holding your hand crossing the street. You had somebody holding your hand when you were entering a new relationship, because they created connection to trustworthy relationships, to trustworthy settings, to trustworthy other people. So we're always, we've been involved in that dance for, our whole lives, and we know how to do that as a culture. We know how to do it as a family. We know how to create a sense of direction that can work and play well with people who are trying to figure out how to do an educational plan or a service plan or a rehab plan that makes some sense in terms of not only the person's sense of direction, but the fact that the community is making big contributions and is in a position to make things happen that the service just simply doesn't have access to, but that we still need each other. We may have to have some stone game-ish kinds of conversations about our history with each other and about the difficulties and the misunderstandings and sometimes the confusion and often the conflict in those relationships, because we're kind of stuck with each other over time. We talked about probably 60 different ways of asking new questions, of taking micro actions, micro events, of making headway, even when the system as a whole, or the state or Medicaid funding aren't really organized yet to support those things, aren't really, there's not a program for that. So we talked about doing this in the context of supporting decision-making, of supporting customized employment, of supporting somebody to be successful in a transition from school to whatever comes next, a transition in where they live, a transition in the role and the contribution that they're making in the larger community. And again, all of these things are within human reach. They're in our hands. And all we've done for the last 4 weeks is to say, all of this is available, and we can take effective action on it. We don't have to wait for the next program. It really helps if human services know how to support and approve of and even assist and help facilitate these things. So when you're when you're planning your next person-centered plan, help somebody think about gathering their circle and so on. And Mary says, thank you, Mary, it's time for the next breakout, which we're going to make short. Okay. As you reflect on your work and your learning over the past 4 weeks, take the opportunity in the breakout room to talk about one or more next steps that are occurring to you that you would like to take to bring these ideas to life in your work or in your daily life, and write them down. Just one next step. What are you inspired to do after what you've heard, what you've been thinking about, and so on. And we're going to do something a bit odd, but it actually fits in terms of time. We're going to do this for 6 minutes. So Mary, send us away for 6 minutes. And you know that in your room of 6, you're going to have 1 minute to talk about that. See you on the other side.
Thank you, David. We really appreciate what a fabulous and moving experience we all had. We want to welcome everyone back to our main room. And thank you, David, for the extraordinary presentation that you just made for all of us to be able to share and kind of experience the stone game is really very powerful and moves all of us to think about these things. Let me wind us up. I hope you had a good experience in your breakout rooms. I know it was short, but being able to share a little bit. So the next steps, we're winding up with David. This is the David will continue to be with us in the trainings we go forward and doing tech support and adding in and doing training also. But this is special for set of sessions that we had, particularly around building your circle. So the next week, we hope that you will join us, is Kathy Brill. And Kathy Brill is talking about person-centered planning for children and young adults. And we've had a number of people say, but how does this help families? How does this help young people? Or service coordinators say, I'm not dealing with the person themselves, I'm dealing with the family. Kathy Brill was the executive director of Parent to Parent, national parent support organization that has chapters around the country and affiliates, including one in Nebraska. And that'll be next week, November 4th. If you haven't signed up, we highly hope that you'll come be with us, and you can do that off of the state person planning website. Following that, each week, there'll be 1 week, we'll be having Paul Barnett, who we have a tremendous interest in for older adults and person-centered planning. Michael Kendrick will be doing supported decision-making, which is a big effort to get started in Nebraska. And we'll also have Mary Phillips, who's the president of the ARC, who's talking about her local effort she's making. Then we'll have Ruthie Marie back with doing discovery and employment, and then finally self-advocates helping people lead their own meeting, and all that's there. We're also having our champions meeting. So if any of you, we've had 4 of these, any of you are really interested in furthering the promotion of person-centered planning, we're going to have it Tuesday, November 9th, several weeks from now. It's from 3 to 4. And if you're interested in doing that, just put in the chat box your email, and we'll add you to the list and send you a link for that. And that really is trying to build a set of partners of people who really want to help push this forward on the implementation, which, as everybody knows, that talking about it is cheap, doing it takes some more effort and energy. Success stories, we have 2. Mary Agnes, who's with us today, is our success story writer. We're in the process of doing a number of them. If anybody has a success story, just put in the chat box success story and your name, and we'll contact you. Nobody has to write it. Mary's a great writer. It's really just somebody has a story that we could share. We're putting the stories up on, with people's permission, of course, up on the department's person-centered planning website. In fact, if you're interested, you can see 2 stories that are there currently. Just want to recommend people to look at the past 10 webinars that we've done. You see David webinar, one. All of these people are the key leaders and movers and shakers, and we did them over the last year, and they're up on the department's website. Facebook page, if you can just follow and have updates and hear about different sessions that we're going, it just helps us get the word out. If you come and join us, you can save today's chat. Anne's put in the chat box just so the 3 little items that are right there. And then finally, if you do the Survey Monkey, and put in the chat box, that helps us because this is funded by the state and the council, and they're very interested in what are the results, the outcomes. And it really helps us. There's also a place for comments that are really helpful. And also, this is part of federal funding, and people in Washington really like to find how is the money helping individual people. So with that, we really want to commend all of you. We want to extend our appreciation. We want to extend our appreciation.
Mark, you're muted.
With that, we want to close. Coming to our end here, we want to commend and appreciate all of you coming. We hope that you'll continue to be with us. We're going each week through December. And in January, we'll start another segment. And we appreciate you coming and being with us. We appreciate David Wetherow. We really appreciate the extraordinary session that you gave for us. Mary Angus, really thank you for being with us. And Janet, who's helping us out here, Jennifer, who'll be training on some of the future items that we're doing. So with all that, we wish you a good day, and we hope that we see you next week. And we really appreciate seeing you. If any of you want to put in the chat box just how the day went, how the series went, how David did, how any of us, we'd love to hear from it. I'll leave the chat box open for a few minutes with people. And with that, we bid you all good day, and thank you all for coming. Bye-bye, everybody.